Welcome, everybody. We're going to wait maybe 1 or 2 more minutes to allow everyone else to log in. We have a lot of people coming on today, and then we'll get started. Okay, so we're going to get going. We do have a lot of people joining us today, so I certainly want to welcome everybody. As a first thing, I want to congratulate all of you on making it through certainly one of the most disruptive and uncertain weekends of our career. I mean, it was amazing what happened over this last weekend, and certainly it was historic for what all of us had to deal with. So I want all of you to take a deep breath, count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was tough. So let's get started. Again, my name is Steve Zisser. I'm a customs attorney. I've been doing this work for about close to now 30 years. And I will tell you that what we just experienced was just amazing. In my entire career, I've never seen such changes happen so quickly. And we had it, we didn't have it, and who knows what's going on. But really one of our goals today is certainly we're going to simplify things. That's what I love to do. I love to simplify import and export rules, and I love to create user-friendly processes that are easy to maintain and easy to implement. And that's one of the things we're going to try to do today is break it down. Joining me on our call today, we have Yanis Sandez and Felisa Lee. Yanis, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Steve. And like Steve said, congratulations for joining this session. We all definitely have been going through a lot in the last couple of days or even weeks leading up to it, right? Having that uncertainty whether it was going to happen or not happen. Certainly things happened very fast. Some got paused, and we'll get more into it. But thank you for joining. I'm the Director of Trade Operations here at Zisser Group. Been in the field for about 15 years, and we hope that this session will be very helpful for all of you.
Felisa?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Felisa Lee. I'm the Trade Compliance Project Manager here at Zisser. I've been working alongside with Steve and Yanis, been in the trade industry for about 14 years now. I've helped companies with all import and export trade areas. And as Yanis and Steve have mentioned, lately what's been happening has been unprecedented, right? So I'm truly excited to welcome you guys to this webinar. Hopefully we'll be able to provide you guys with some valuable insights on what's going on today and help you guys with a lot of confusion and concern that you guys may have.
Okay, so in today's webinar, we talk about kind of why you're here. And certainly most of you are probably here because you do import to the United States from China, Mexico, Canada. Those were certainly the biggest hits we'll talk about today. Certainly you're worried and confused by all the news and all the different rumors and all the different things that are going on. We're hoping we're going to clarify some of that. Certainly you're looking for answers. You're looking for clarity. You're looking for maybe some insight into what may happen in the future. We're going to do that with you today. And certainly you need to stay ahead. You need to be able to plan. You need to strategize. You need to forecast. And when I talk about answers, not only do you need answers, but a lot of you are being called upon to give answers to other people in your organization. And we'll talk about that today because ultimately people are reaching out to you. All of you have become very, very popular in this field because now people are asking you, well, what do we do? What's happening? What's going on? We're going to try to bring some clarity to that. Our goal today, in today's webinar, our goal is to basically clearly share the latest updates, including what we know, what we expect, mitigation strategies, immediate recommendations, future outlook. And I'm committed in this session today to really simplifying it like no one else. We really want to break it down for you. We really want to show you what kind of going on and what the impacts are going to look like. So essentially you can get ready. As I said, the changes that we're experiencing are unprecedented. This is the most significant threat to global trade in the past 70 years. Literally in the past 70 years, we've never seen things go in this direction to more restrictive trade, higher tariffs, and this is directly impacting our 3 largest trading partners. This is what's interesting about this. If you understand the dynamics of what's going on, we're literally challenging our 3 largest trading partners by far, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So here's sort of our agenda. As I said, what we're going to cover, what we know. This is kind of what we know, what's kind of been locked in, what's already been released out there. We'll tell you about that. What we expect to happen. There's certain things we don't necessarily know, but what we expect and what we anticipate. We're going to give you some mitigation strategies that you might want to consider to maybe reduce or lower some of your impacts. We'll talk about some immediate recommendations, things that you should do now and get ready for today as quickly as possible. And then I think the most fun part at the end of our session today is sort of this future outlook. What's going to happen? What does that crystal ball look like? And I'll tell you, that's something that right now is pretty dynamic and pretty exciting, and almost day to day, that is usually happening. In fact, we have some information that we learned this morning, and that's going to be pretty interesting. We'll talk about that at the end of our session today as we get to that future outlook. So pretty packed agenda. Again, we only have about 1 hour with you today. Again, if you have any questions, post your question. Post your question. We might not get to all the questions because, as I said, we have a lot of people on this session. We have actually close to 1,000 people actually registered for this webinar in just 2 days. We actually posted this on, I think it was on late Monday. So obviously there's a lot of interest today. But if you have a question, since you think about it, if we don't respond to the question at the session, we will answer you and send you back a response afterwards. So I promise you that. That's not a problem. If you would like a copy of this presentation, just not the presentation, but the recording. We are recording this, so that will be available. And for, maybe they'll also get that also. So what do we know? I think this is the most significant things. These are current developments, official updates. What do we know today? And let's go to the next slide and talk about this. And I think Yanis and Felisa, this is the most significant thing. What happened on Saturday? Felisa, what happened on Saturday? We waited, you and I, all of us, we waited because we thought something was going to happen on Saturday. He kept saying something was going to happen on Saturday. And I was watching my clock and I said, well, wait a minute, I'm on the West Coast. He's on the East Coast. And they said midday. And I kept thinking by noon, we're going to have something East Coast time. And I don't think it came out till what?
Later, yeah.
Later, all of a sudden, it started getting released. I mean,
Yeah, Steve, sure, as everyone knows, here on Saturday, as you said, we were waiting for it. President Trump actually ended up signing those executive orders, adding those additional tariffs to our 3 trading partners, to China, Mexico, and Canada. I know, as you said, we were waiting for it, and I think I personally even gave up on it, said, well, it's not going to happen, and then all of a sudden, all the emails and texts started happening. So, yeah, so definitely on Saturday, we knew that those additional tariffs were going to happen, 10% on China, additional China duties, and then 25% for Canada and Mexico.
And I think the biggest thing for me is those executive orders, and we'll talk about this in a little more detail, were very specific. They gave a lot of good detail. And of course, everything became effective on Tuesday, which was yesterday. That was the start date, was Tuesday. And for those of you who didn't know, actually Monday was a holiday in Mexico, so we were always really concerned because Mexico's really shut down on Monday, and then this starts on Tuesday. How's that going to look like? And also what he did, which I think was really interesting, he went with the International Emerging Economic Powers Act, the IEEPA, which gave him the authority to do this immediately. No notice of comment, no delay, no authorization from Congress. That certainly didn't happen before with the 301s.
Yeah, certainly. And obviously, as we knew, the excuses that he was using was for national security concerns, for unlawful immigration and flow of fentanyl. That's something that he was campaigning heavily on, and definitely he used that as a leverage for that.
Yanis, I don't think any of us can say we were surprised because he said this before he became, he was elected president back in November. He said it way back in October and September. We knew. So once he was elected, on November 4th, it was it. We knew this was going to happen, didn't we?
Exactly. I mean, for us, and he's been very consistent with what he was campaigning, what he's been continuing to say to reporters and direct. We pretty much know what's going. And like Steve and Felisa, we were proactively, right, looking at scenarios, options, because as soon as he got elected, we knew this was going to happen. So was it entirely a surprise? Perhaps we thought he was crying wolf. He definitely wasn't. And the executive order pretty much laid out what we thought was going to happen. I think it's also very simple, very straight to the point. There's no gray. It's very what he wanted, what he needs, a clear deadline, and it's happening very, very fast.
I think that's what some people say they were surprised, but to be honest, I wasn't surprised. I don't think most of us should have been surprised if you had been following the news. And again, like Yanis said, I think he's been brutally consistent. Here he became president literally on January 20th. He has actually signed more executive orders than any president in history in such a short amount of time. And the executive orders that he's signing are extremely significant. If you look at most of them, they are pretty pretty compelling, pretty significant in terms of the level of change that they're imposing on different things. Again, he told us he was going to do that. He's following through. I think that's something he's really looking for this time around. Last time, I think he had a very, very slow start. Last time he became president in 2016. I think today he's looking to have a very fast start. He said in the first 100 days he wants to accomplish a lot of things. This was one of his top priorities, was certainly dealing with trade and using tariffs as a tool. And this is what he said he was going to do, and now he's doing it, and he went after our top 3 trading partners. I think this is so significant. What most people don't realize is our top 3 trading partners, Canada, Mexico, and China, they represent a significant amount of volume for the United States in terms of import volume. But I think what's even more significant is Canada. You know, for Canada, 87% of all of their exports go to the United States. For Mexico, 78% of their exports go to the United States. So, you know, it's not just about import into the U.S. You have to understand that these countries really do rely on the United States as their #1 customer for their products. So he recognizes this, and so he wanted to accomplish certain goals and objectives, and that's exactly what he did on Saturday. The next slide. So again, what we know, this I think is significant because, Lisa, we talked about this. This is kind of what happened. These are the 3 things that he technically did. Now, the good news is it looks like some of this stuff is now suspended. So why don't you walk us through this?
Yes. Jenny, go for it.
Yeah, so basically this is in a nutshell what these executive orders covered and what was impacted by that. And certainly for Mexico, this would basically mean that there would be an additional 25%, an additional tariff on products of Mexico origin. And we're going to clarify more into that, but Mexico origin is a key word here. So definitely if you've had a product that was Mexico origin being imported into the US from wherever, you would now be subject to an additional 25%. Thankfully for now, it's suspended. It's been paused for 30 days from that day. So we will get into more details next. The next one, Canada, pretty similar in terms of what the executive order is. So 25% on all products of Canada origin. For Canada, they did give that that reduction of the tariff for energy products. So that would have the additional 10% versus the 25%. Also, this one, Canada, as of today, is suspended. It's been paused for 30 days, similar as Mexico. And the one that has us nervous right now, obviously, it's China. So that one, as of this morning, it's still in play. It started effective yesterday. And this one, essentially, remember, it's an additional 10% on products of China. And interesting enough, now Hong Kong got called out. So before Section 301, China, but this one specifically is covering additional 10% on products of China and Hong Kong origin. And this one is effective as of yesterday.
Now, Felisa, you mentioned, you know, because last time around, you're right, they didn't cover Hong Kong, did they? So for Section 301, no Hong Kong, but now they added.
Yes, you're right. I think for China, on the China side, at least, I know we were very surprised on that one. We thought it was going to be similar to the Section 301. Hong Kong was going to be excluded, but it seems on this one, it specifically calls out China and Hong Kong origin. So for certain cases, for those importers that are importing Hong Kong origin products, you might not be subject for those 301, but you will be subject to those additional 10%.
Okay, now, latest news that we just heard. The other, Mexico and Canada are definitely suspended, which is good news, which means they're negotiating, they're working things out. And we'll talk more about that, but certainly in our future outlook, I'm pretty optimistic about that. China, now we just heard this morning, it actually was announced on CNN, there are ongoing negotiations right now with China, and there is rumor that that one is also going to be suspended for probably an additional 30 days. So there's talk about that he might be willing to do that. Apparently, China is making some concessions. They may be willing to come to the table and start to talk, which would be pretty historic, because if you remember last time with the Section 301, that really didn't happen. China really didn't come to the table. They weren't able to work things out. And we had Section 301 List 1, then List 2, and List 3, and List 4, and it kept happening. And we all kept thinking it was going to go away. and it did go away. And even today, so many years later, I mean, you realize the Section 301 duties have been around since 2018. So we're talking a really long period of time that we've had Section 301 duties on China, anywhere from 25% to 7.5%. I think what's really interesting too is that these duties were on all products, no exceptions and no exclusions. Essentially, it was across the board, like Yanis said. If it's country of origin, no matter where it ships from, if it's country of origin Mexico, you pay that duty. Canada, you pay that duty. China, you pay that duty. So a lot of people think, well, it's where you ship it from. No, it's not. It's country of origin. You ship it from a China item from Mexico, you pay the duty. You just pay the duty. That's the way it works. But again, as I said, there are rumors out there right now that maybe there'll be a pause on the China additional tariffs. Right now, I'm kind of calling those the emergency tariffs, the additional tariffs. And when, again, we say additional, they're on top of existing tariffs that you already pay. So I'm hopeful that happens, and there is also a pause to that. That would be actually an excellent sign to see that, because that may generate some more confidence in what's going to happen in the future, that we're trying to work things out, we're trying to negotiate, give the United States what they're looking for in terms of the security that they're looking for, the immigration controls that they're looking for, the amount of drugs that are coming here into the United States. They're looking for that level of cooperation. And then, hey, maybe he's willing to say, hey, there's no longer an emergency. And if there's no longer an emergency, we'll take it away. In fact, the executive order specifically says, if the president determines that there's no longer an emergency, he can terminate it. That's it. It's really that simple. It happens that fast. So all of this could be extremely quick and extremely fast. So maybe this was really a shot across the bow to get what he was looking for. So I think there's some positive things certainly out there. Next slide. Talk about a little about some of the key takeaways of what we saw here happen. And we kind of talked about this with Mexico. The key thing, it was Mexico origin. As I said, it had to be Mexico origin, country of origin Mexico. The interesting thing, Felisa and Yanis, is how you determine country of origin. Now, this is very dynamic here, because with Mexico and Canada, we deal with very specific rules. And Yanis, Felisa, I think we talked about this. What did they say? They actually gave two options, didn't they, for country of origin?
Yeah, surprisingly. So again, what we know, right? We knew originally that Mexico was going to be paused on Monday when we started, but however, for Canada, the directive actually were issued. And Steve, that's where we saw how customs was going to go ahead and determine Mexico origin or Canada origin, right? And as we knew, they actually quoted both 102 rules and substantial transformation within how to determine the origins coming in for Canada in that case.
Yeah, and that's very significant for most of you. Again, I won't get into all the details of country of origin rules, but to determine country of origin, if it's coming from Canada or Mexico into the United States, there's what we call NAFTA marking rules, what we call NAFTA marking rules. Really, they're USMCA rules today, but basically they were NAFTA marking rules, and they're basically in 19 CFR Part 102. 19 CFR Part 102. Those are the customs regulations. And in those regulations, they have very specific rules of origin for how you determine what the origin is. Now, that purpose of that 102 is only to determine origin for goods that are shipping from Canada or Mexico to the United States or back the other way. They're very specialized rules. They don't apply outside of that area, just within those three countries. And again, that determines origin. But there's another set of origin rules called substantial transformation rules. And those rules apply to anything outside of the three countries. So what they're basically telling you, the way I read this, is if you're shipping the item from Mexico to the United States, Canada to the United States, you do the 102 rules. But in some cases, you're shipping an item Canada origin or Mexico origin, and it's not in Mexico or in Canada. It's in, let's say, the UK. And I have an item in the UK and I'm shipping it to the United States and Canada origin, I'm going to have to use the substantial transformation rules. Now, those rules, 102 rules, substantial transformation rules, are similar, but they're different. And they can generate, Felisa, correct? Different results, right?
Yeah, definitely. We've seen that.
So different results, different outcomes, and that makes it kind of funky as to what rule of origin you use. And there's some real strategic opportunities here with certain types of rules. The 102 rules tend to be very objective and very certain and very specific. The substantial transformation rules, on the other hand, tend to be much more subjective. They're more gray. They're more case by case. Those are much, much harder to implement and to use. It was very interesting. They called out both. And for a lot of you, you probably didn't see this because, remember, the Mexico version never came out because they didn't need to come up with any implementing rules because they suspended it too fast. But the Canada ones actually did come out. I think they've been withdrawn now, right, Felisa?
Yes, they did. Yeah. They were released for a little bit and then they're gone.
Yeah, so if you didn't see them, they're gone. You won't be able to find them. But we saw them. They did come out pretty fast because we thought Canada was going to go forward. So very, very interesting insight because a lot of us were asking, how do we implement it? How do we determine origin? Because this is origin-based. And Yanis, this is the whole key to this.
Key to this is origin, and I think the fact that they added substantial transformation was very clever because, like you said, it's not based on where you're shipping it, like not assuming that it's only products that are shipping from Mexico or shipping from Canada. They did acknowledge that everyone has dynamic. And very easily you can have product of Canada or Mexico origin coming into the U.S. from other countries. So that's where they caught that, but with adding that substantial transformation language. So very interesting.
So the next slide, and please, so we're going to talk a little bit about China, what we know. Now, China, of course, right now, Yanis, you said earlier, it is official. It did start yesterday. Right now, people are paying an additional 10% duties. And the cool thing, not cool thing, I won't say that. It's not cool. The one thing about these rules, one of our key takeaways that I got out of this, it covered all products. If most of you remember, when it came to Section 301 duties, they covered specific products, and there were exclusion opportunities. Plus, there was a whole group of products, what we call List 4B,
different rate.
No additional tariffs at all, no impact whatsoever. This one, Lisa, it's everything, right?
Yeah, this one pretty much accounts for all of them. As you said, Steve, before it was different lists, different rates, right? It ranged from 7.5 to 25%. This one, it's pretty straightforward, pretty simple, kind of what Yanis was mentioning. He laid it out very simple, covers all products from China origin and Hong Kong origin, and slapping an additional 10% of that. Implementing this is actually pretty easy. As we saw in the directive for China, it's one secondary 199 code for that. It applies. It pretty much, if you're China origin, Hong Kong origin, that's the 9903 code that you're gonna attach to your entry, and that will subject to that additional 10%.
Yeah, and it helps clarify it because this is we saw a lot of communications plans where we're just trying to grasp this concept, kind of saying, but these are my items that are subject to 301. So is it only on these, or is it on everything else? Because many times, probably those other products were not on the radar. Didn't matter, China, right? Because they weren't covered by Section 301. So now this one specifically, it's everything. It's looking at your entire import database and saying, what is actually China, and doing that 10% impact. And like you said, coming up with that 99 was super easy. The broker community obviously is working diligently to set their systems up and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's just a line. It's just an additional order. We'll get into that. But yeah, very, very, very impactful having 10% across everything.
I thought that was certainly definitely a unique approach. A lot of us thought there were going to be exclusion opportunities. There were going to be certain things that might be eliminated. Nope, not the way he did it. It's just across the board, which, by the way, is very telling to a lot of us, because this is the concept that I think he's been playing about universal nature of tariffs. Really, you're just almost going to hit the whole sector. You're not going to break things out. 301 was much more strategic in terms of the way it attacked certain things. Some of us on 301 are paying 25% duty. Some of us are paying 7.5% duty, and some of us are paying nothing based on those rules. But with this one, blanket, which made it so much easier for them to implement, execute, apply. We're just going across the board. Also, for country of origin on this, country of origin China, you use the substantial transformation rules, like we said before. And this is really key, because substantial transformation is not black and white. A lot of people think, well, I take China goods, I assemble them in Vietnam, I'm Vietnam. Well, not necessarily. In fact, if you take all China material and you simply do an assembly in Vietnam, most likely you are not Vietnam, you are China. And vice versa, you could do this other ways, but there's a lot of strategic opportunities to get origin. Felisa, I think this is probably one of the hottest topics out there.
Oh yeah,
we'll
definitely.
certainly talk about a little more, but origin is not black and white.
Definitely, especially for China one. I mean, we saw that for Section 301. There was already strategies on that one, how to achieve that substantial transformation, getting away from China. And I know now with this additional tariff into it, now encompasses all products. So kind of what Denise was saying, products like before you are like, oh, Section 301 does not apply to me. Well, guess what? Now it will. And now it becomes even more important to strategize on that origin for your products here.
Yeah, and origin really, as I said, it is very case by case. A lot of you might have been monitoring U.S. Customs issuing a lot of rulings. In fact, U.S. Customs has issued more rulings, customs rulings on country of origin determinations, I think, than ever before in my history, just in the last 4 or 5 years. And 99% of them are all China-based country of origin determinations, whether is China or isn't China. The cool thing is, remember, you can still use China. You can still leverage China material. You could even do processing in China. It's just a question of what's the substantial transformation. Where did the product become what it is and essentially take on its final identity? That's the key, and that is gray. It's case by case, it's product by product, commodity by commodity, and customs will tell you that. But there are opportunities, again, when you manage your supply chain and you manage how you do your sourcing and you manage how you do your processing operations, there's certain things that you can tweak and change. You get a different origin. Get a different origin, save the duty, because if you're not China origin, you don't pay this. It's that simple and that black and white. And in fact, Felisa, I think we've had situations where companies have been able to convince customs that it wasn't origin, wasn't China, and then they go back and get a bunch of refunds from the government and say, hey, we weren't China to begin with. Give us all our money back. We've been overpaying, and they recover a significant amount of money. Remember, when you discover some of these opportunities, generally you can go back about 18 months and recover. So if you've been paying duty and maybe your origin is wrong and you've been overpaying, if you discover that, you can actually go back, file post-summary corrections, PSEs, you could do protests. Generally, you could go back about 18 months, we say about 18 months, and you could challenge them. And if you have a basis for it and they agree, you get all that money back, which is really kind of nice. So don't think this is a one and done thing and say, oh, hey, I've already paid the money, it's gone. It might not be gone based on these rules. So something, I agree, you definitely want to be looking at this and taking advantage of it. So that's kind of what we know. And this, I think, is a great little slide because this kind of walks you through exactly what we know. And this really kind of illustrates it, I think, one of the best ways. USMCA. People always ask what's going on with USMCA. My opinion, USMCA is alive and well. It's fine. And that will continue to exempt you from regular duties, the regular duties. For Section 301 duties, doesn't work. For these new 25% and 10% tariffs, doesn't work, which means you could be USMCA eligible, but you're not going to get an exemption. And I'm super confident in that approach. If you read what Customs had already put out there for Canada, when we saw some of the implementing language, that's exactly what they're doing. They're saying, yeah, you owe the additional tariffs, even if you qualify for USMCA. So you're USMCA eligible plus the additional tariffs, you still got to pay that 25 or that 10%. That's still going to apply. So, but USMCA is alive and well. Don't think that it went away. It didn't. 9801, this was huge. This was huge. They basically acknowledged that all 98 programs, 9801, 9802, 9817 are still around, and those will exempt you from the new duties. They did exempt you from the Section 301 duties that came out before. They used the same language that they used in 2018, and in my opinion, looking at the language, they cut and pasted it to this one, and they're continuing to exempt it. I thought this was mind-blowing because we were really worried about this, Eunice, that they weren't going to do that, and they did it, right?
Oh yeah, we were very worried about it because, again, this is under an emergency type scenario situation. We said, well, perhaps this is going to be obviously stricter in this area. We were worried about really great programs such as Nairobi, 9817, et cetera, on how that could definitely impact a lot of companies. But thankfully, when we saw that clause that kind of included the Chapter 98, that gave a lot of alleviation to a lot of companies, basically exempting it. 9802, I know partially exempt, and we'll get into more details, but again, essentially the 98 programs are still exempt. Good.
Yeah, so pretty much, Felisa, right, all the 98 programs were protected, even 9802, 9801, correct. U.S. goods assembled, U.S. goods returned, repairs and alteration, 9802, 005060. So people that send product to Mexico or Canada for repair and alteration. Again, you'll get a full exemption, you get a partial exemption.
Correct. As Eunice was mentioning, when we saw that clause on the 98, I think we all released some breath out of it because we were holding it in. I know we had a lot of clients that were sitting on that one. So yeah, pretty much all 98s are pretty much exempt from it, from general duties, Section 301, and the emergency tariff, except for 9802, as you mentioned, it's partial, but we knew that it's already applicable the way that it is right now. So no change on that.
Now, I will tell you, we're not going to go through the 98 programs and how they work. They are fairly complicated. If you have more questions, you can certainly ask those questions. But the 98 programs is absolutely an opportunity to mitigate duty impacts. And we definitely encourage you to take a look at that if that's something that you can take advantage of. Certainly it is going to work and it can be an exemption. I think one of the biggest ones we were surprised about, this was huge to me. I did not think they would put this in the executive order. He called it out in the executive order, all three orders de minimis. This is the Section 321 program that allows goods that are under $800 to come into the United States. They pay no duty from anywhere in the world. They are under $800, a single shipment to a single consignee on a single day, no duty whatsoever. A lot of you know there's a lot of activity in this space. In fact, over 1 billion shipments per year of Section 321 de minimis, gone. If it's gone, if it's Mexico origin, gone, Canada origin, gone. The biggest one, of course, Felisa,
China
origin. If it's China origin, you're gone. No de minimis, which means they have to make a full consumption entry and pay full duty. Eunice, this is going to impact so many companies that were leveraging this program for years, and all of a sudden, in one stroke of the pen, he knocked it out.
This was such a very impactful move that, like you said, there's so much business relying on this. E-commerce right now is everything, and this was like the best avenue to basically shy away, not just from general duty, but when the Section 301 got imposed, didn't pay either, so that was huge. And with e-commerce booming and whatnot, this was like the safe haven. And I know we have been seeing talks about 321 and how viable that program was in the future, and we knew there was some language out there already, but the fact that it's now excluded and not available under these emergency tariffs, basically that knocks it out. There's no more question anymore, right? If you have China origin goods, you cannot use 321, and that's huge.
Yeah, no, I think it's huge, and certainly for him to call it out, certainly I was reading that one of their strong motivations in this executive order was targeting specifically de minimis. De minimis, I think, is a loophole to get fentanyl and other drug precursors into the United States through these low-value de minimis shipments. Even the U.S. Postal Service has said that they're not going to allow the low-value shipments to come through the UPS, U.S. Postal Service system from China. Those have been cut off as of yesterday. That was actually cut off. Massive, because the volumes, as I said, they were huge. And a lot of those ships and a lot of those containers now are being actually turned around and sent back because they were all shipping that way. So how those goods are going to come into the U.S. and that means full regular duty, 301 duty, the additional 10% tariffs out of China. You can still import them, but boy, that duty impact went up massively. So this was a massive impact to that whole industry. In fact, that was front page news yesterday in the New York Times. Program has been kind of annihilated and gutted through this executive order. So I think that was extremely significant. The final one, duty drawback is available for regular duties. It's available for 301 duties. But guess what? The executive order specifically called out no duty drawback on these additional tariffs. So if you bring in these goods and you pay these 25% or these 10% additional tariffs, emergency tariffs, you cannot get that back when you export it, duty drawback. That was massive to me because I'm thinking, why did they go after drawback? Drawback, we encourage exports. We like export. Drawback's a good program. It's a solid program. This surprised me, Felisa. I mean, I didn't expect any of this to happen just because why go after drawback? And you need the same thing.
Yeah, same thing.
I mean, it can.
I mean, again, perhaps it's because emergency, very, very strict, very black and white. But really, again, if you're going to export the product at the end of the day, why not allow you to get that money back? And certainly a lot of companies rely on drawback because to mitigate the Section 301 impact, it's a huge program.
Huge. It's a big program.
Weird to how you're going to manage that, right? Where certain value, yes, you can claim it under the duty drawback under 301, but this 10% you won't. So this is being very, very interesting for a lot of companies that heavily rely on.
Now, for a lot of you on this call, you know, when I show you all this, you're saying, this only applies to what he did in the executive order. No, it doesn't. This is insight. For all of you on this call, this is insight into his way of thinking, into his process, into his mindset of the Trump administration. So if you think this doesn't mean much, oh my gosh, this is huge for the next 4 years. It tells you their internal thought process. De minimis, completely jeopardized across the board. Drawback may be jeopardized across the board. I don't know, but who knows? They could take drawback away or be looking to limit or restrict drawback in more and more significant ways. I'm just telling you, this is kind of the mindset of where they're going. And so, again, it's not this one and done. A lot of people look at these and say, one and done. It's just an executive order and never happen again. You have to understand where this is coming from. Whoever was advising him, in my opinion, whoever was advising President Trump on this executive order knew exactly what they were doing. They were very, very sophisticated because these programs like 321 and Drawback, those are very technical programs. I mean, people that I know were reading the executive order. They don't do customs work. They don't do trade work. And they were asking me, what the heck is that? What drawback? What de minimis? They had no idea because they understood tariffs. Tariffs are easy. But these other programs, why did he put that in there? Well, it tells me there was a lot behind there. There's a lot of thought going into this, and there were certain things that they wanted to cut down. We all know he wants to generate more revenue. They absolutely want to generate more revenue through tariffs. It's his favorite word. He loves tariffs. They don't want to give it back. Is that a surprise? Not a surprise to me. They don't want to give it back. So you have to understand that right now, drawback is threatened. It's a risk right now. There's a risk to drawback. I didn't say they're going to eliminate it. Don't know that. But certainly it's an indicator. It's something I want you guys to have kind of in the back of your mind. Is it safe? I don't know. I can't tell you. You can absolutely count on it. Right now for 301, you can get drawback. But Felisa, they could change that very fast. Very fast.
Definitely.
They can eliminate that. Say no drawback on 301. Gone. So that may happen. Next slide. So what to expect? What to expect? And this is kind of where we see some of the potential impact going forward and what we're looking at. And Felisa and Yanis, I want you guys to walk through this because I think these are just some examples that we want to share with you on what the impacts look like pre-emergency tariffs and post-emergency tariffs. And we're going to use this just an example. These are just examples, but to give you kind of an illustration on the differences and kind of what happened, kind of what's going on, because ultimately all of you need to look at your products and your impacts and your supply chain and kind of run through these scenarios so you can validate what's happening. You can also forecast where it's going. You can plan, you can project. This is critical for all of you to be able to do this because even though the China duties are going on, but if the Mexico and the Canada come back after 30 days, you need to understand those impacts pretty fast because 25% is significant. So Felisa, why don't you walk us through this?
Yeah, so as Steve was saying, this is just an illustration of example of how it would tentatively look for a product, right? So right now we'll start with China here. We know that that's effective right now as of yesterday. So in this case, we have a scenario that we have a wire harness, and we know it's classified under subheading 8544. And we're saying in this case, we know it's China based on the origin substantial transformation rules. Pre this emergency tariff, all you had to worry about when you had an origin, China origin, was the Section 301. So in this case, as you guys can see in the table for the pre-emergency tariff, you'll have your first tariff line, which is your 8544 classification, China origin, and the 2.6 duty on that one, plus a second line for that China 25% in there. So as a total pre-emergency tariff, total duties were $41. Now with this post-emergency tariff, now that they came in as of yesterday, now we're talking about that additional 10%. So this table right here shows you how that implication of that 10% looks like in this case in this product. We knew those two first lines would stay the same. That additional third line, we already know what the 9903 code for that one would be. Adding that 10% on that $150 pricing on that one adds an additional $15 on this product. Again, and illustration purposes, but now last week you were paying an import of $41, and now post this emergency tariff, now you're looking at, in this scenario, about $56. So about a $15 increase here. So if you guys, as Steve was saying, this is more of an exercise, an example. Obviously, you guys have your own information, your own data to go ahead and plug this in to kind of see what that impact of that 10% looks like for your imports right now.
Yeah, and so one of the things, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but one of the things, again, you want to really hyper focus on is origin is important here. And the second thing that's very important here is value. Value, because as you notice, the value that you report, that's going to be the assessment. You're going to pay the duty on the value that you report. So one of the things we're going to recommend toward the end of the session, you got to really take a relook at your value and the values that you're reporting, because again, if you're over reporting value, there's the impact. If you're under reporting value, you might be underpaying, and that could be a problem too. So we want to make sure that value is very, very important, because obviously, like we always said, overall, you have to understand duties in the United States historically are very, very low. Duties in the United States are among the lowest in the world, about 2.5, 2.8% average duties in the United States. And many items into the United States are unconditionally duty-free. We don't pay anything. We have the lowest duties in the world in this country, bar none. So in the past, if your value wasn't completely correct or you messed up a little bit, the impact wasn't that big. Well, now as duties go up, value has a much, much bigger impact. It's much more significant. And so a lot of us, I think, historically got a little bit lazy about value because we go, what's the difference here? Here you can see big impact, big impact. Next one, Felicia, I think is really illustrative, because the next scenario, I think in this one, we're looking at Mexico. Again, assuming Mexico tariffs actually go through. So let's assume that Mexico tariffs go through at 25%. And Felicia, this scenario is a little bit interesting too, because you have kind of different sub-variations.
Yeah, Steve, so in this one, again, as you said, Mexico right now, it's paused for the next 30 days. Assuming it does take place, I know a lot of you guys in the audience today can relate to this scenario right now. Again, using the same scenario, we have the same product in here. Let's say in this case, we've determined based, again, we mentioned this, coming from Mexico, we would look 102 rules, right? In this case, let's assume we determined that it was a Mexico. But as you guys know, right now, the way that you guys been doing it, we do have to analyze it based on substantial transformation. Let's say it is China. We are subject to that China substantial transformation. And in this scenario, let's assume that this product, it is USMCA eligible. So in this case, for pre-emergency tariff, obviously, as USMCA eligible, you're exempt of those general duties at 2.6%. You don't have to pay. However, as we knew, those Section 301 ones, you were not exempt from that. You were subject to that 25%. So in this pre-emergency tariff, you were subject to that $37 duties, right? Now, in this event, having that post-emergency.
I want to clarify that, because what a lot of you might not be seeing here, but in that first scenario, this is before the 25%. That 25% is actually China 301 duties. It's
Correct.
A very unique situation, but you do have situations where you could be USMCA eligible and still pay China 301, because under the substantial transformation rules, you are China origin and you're USMCA simultaneously. It doesn't happen all that often, but it does happen, and Customs has called it out, and we do see it. In the second scenario, Obviously, it's the same scenario, but we have to add in the 10%. Even though this is a Mexico item, USMCA, it pays an additional 10%, $52. And of course, the last one, which is the most amazing one, if we think about it, is you would actually have to pay everything. And this is rare. This is what we call double tariffs. But under the scenario that Customs proposed and what they're talking about, substantial transformation and 102, we actually see scenarios where you could be paying both Mexico 25%, China 25%, and the additional tariff 10%, all at the same time. That is a pretty unique scenario, but it will happen. We actually think it can happen based on the rules and the way they're structured today. We think Customs needs to be challenged on this issue in particular, but $37, $52, $90, obviously big impacts. Again, just examples, but these are the kind of things that can happen where you could be paying double tariffs based on the difference between the 102 rules and the substantial transformation rules. Again, technical. I apologize for that. It is technical, but I just want to give you guys a quick illustration of that. If you have a question, absolutely can ask those. Next slide. Okay, this is our biggest concern in the world, and you've already seen it. They already proposed it, is retaliatory tariffs. Eunice, I think all of us expected this. As soon as the U.S. hit Mexico, Canada, and China, what happened? Boy, within a day, we had proposals coming out for retaliatory tariffs, and what
very vocal. So again, Mexico president, very vocal, very open to President Sheinbaum, very open to communication without getting too ahead of ourselves. Very clear though that there was a plan B, and that should the additional tariffs be in effect, plan B would be announced. Thankfully, like you said, there was that call with the president, there was negotiation, and really no actual retaliatory tariff scope was announced because the agreement was done very early. However, Canada also with the press conference, very vocal about it and more direct in terms of what that retaliatory measure. And actually, they moved ahead and posted what they were going to do, right? So phased out, but the first phase was pretty impactful, 25% tariff on U.S. origin goods covering 30 billion type of imports. We saw that primarily it's more of like agricultural type products, right? And some apparel, textile, but definitely very targeted to industries that are heavy here in the U.S. that would definitely have an impact into Canada. And also, China was very vocal about the retaliatory measure of that 15% tariff on coal and 10% on crude oil. Because we're on the table, definitely.
I think that was key, and a lot of us got to remember that if we impose tariffs, the expectation is they're going to impose tariffs back and forth. So a lot of you think, oh, this is just for my import. I want all of you to really be thinking about this. This is also about your exports, because right now we would say today, these are on the drawing board, but who knows what else he's going to do. In Canada tells us they have a list 1, they have a list 2, they have a list 3. And like you said, Eunice, Mexico already had its ducks in order, and they already had things lined up to do it. So I think that's significant. Again, one of the biggest things, of course, we think is the impact on the southern border and EMEX operations. For those of you on this call who have EMEX operations in Mexico, I think the question is, what are those impacts going to look like? Again, our biggest concern with EMEX operations or people that work in Mexico or have operations in Mexico is, again, your inputs into Mexico, right, Eunice? Because now we're thinking that, are you going to be able to bring U.S. material into Mexico, or are those going to be dutiable? Assuming this all goes through, they're going to be dutiable.
Exactly, and that's the biggest uncertainty, right? Not only will all of my products that are going to be ultimately Mexico origin, my finished goods that I'm going to import into the U.S. are now going to be subject to the 25%, right? If it gets lifted, but the other way around, as Steve said, in terms of the retaliatory measure, well, what if Mexico says, okay, all U.S. goods or any of these specific goods are going to be now tariffed into Mexico? No exception for EMEX, no special clauses. Sorry. How is that going to impact the dynamic? And I think that's where a lot of the industries associations raised their voice and really wanted to get Mexico to do this negotiation, which it was successful for this pause. But again, it is a pause, and Mexico is prepared if the pause gets lifted. What would that retaliation look like?
Remember, it is a pause. So right now, I think you have to, as I always say, prepare for the worst, hope for the best, but you got to prepare. You absolutely have to assume it because who knows how these negotiations go. And next slide. I think, again, let's talk really quickly about mitigation strategies. Again, there are some things you guys can do to certainly look at things. Number one, look at your origins. Absolutely look at your country of origins. Make sure you can support them, you can back them up, you can defend them. As I said, origin is sophisticated. It's a little complicated. It is case by case. There are strategic opportunities where you can change your country of origin, and that, of course, can result in significant duty savings. A lot of companies have already been doing this for the China 301 duties. So again, I would be looking at this for both your Mexico operations, Canada, things that you might do. Also, again, with these additional tariffs on China covering everything, you might want to really relook at that. Again, origin, I think, is going to be the driving force in everything that happens in the future when it comes to tariffs that Trump is talking about, that President Trump is looking toward. Value, absolutely look at your valuation, look at your valuation methodology. Where are your values coming from? Are they correct? Are you overvaluing? Are you undervaluing? I do recommend that all of you participate in the U.S. Customs Reconciliation Program because that gives you an opportunity to adjust and modify your values if you discover that you've over or underreported very easily. It's an easy program to participate in. Talk to your U.S. Customs broker. They'll get you into the program. There's no cost to it at all. And if you don't have any adjustments, you just file what we call a no change and you close it out and you're done. But it allows you to open up your data for up to 21 months after the import to make adjustments up or down. Overpay, you can get money back. If you underpay, again, then you would possibly owe some money. But it's a legal way to do this, and it gives you a lot of internal protection. Absolutely recommend that. Number one recommendation, reevaluate your duty-free programs. USMCA, 9801, 9802, using Nairobi, any way that you can leverage any of these programs. The biggest one that I like right now is 9802 8068. What that means is if you take U.S. goods, you ship them offshore and they're in a condition ready for assembly, and you assemble them into a product and bring that product back, you can isolate out that U.S. content value. You don't pay any duty on that. You don't pay any duty on the value of that material, that U.S. material. So you get to extract that out. Again, this is a specialized program, but a lot of you have product being made overseas with U.S. content. There might be some U.S. content in there. Look at that 9802 program, great opportunity. I love foreign trade zones. Foreign trade zones, I think, is one of your best protections simply because if they don't allow drawback, if they're not going to allow drawback on these things, and you're going to export these items, a foreign trade zone might be your best opportunity. Bring it into a foreign trade zone, and then if you export it, you don't pay anything. So this will get around that drawback exclusion where you can't recover it through drawback. So an FTZ, a foreign trade zone, is a great opportunity, and I love foreign trade zones. I think the foreign trade zones, from what I can tell, are pretty protected under this program. I think they're still going to work, but something definitely all of you guys want to look at as an opportunity. Again, some of our immediate recommendations, these are pretty quick. Assess your supply chain. Really look and understand your supply chain. Know your supply chain. Know where you're sourcing, where you're buying. Look at your customs bond. Make sure you have bond sufficiency. Remember, if your duty impacts go up, your bond, your customs bond, have to represent 10% of the value of the duties that you pay. So if you're paying $1 million in duties, you need a $100,000 bond. Well, if your duties go up from $1 million to $5 million, $5 million, you're going to need a $500,000 bond. And if you, because your bond isn't sufficient anymore, and they got to get a new bond, that's going to become more of a challenge because as bond amounts go up, you may have to get, back it up with collateral. You're going to have to show them financial records. A lot of times the sureties are not going to issue those bonds. So you're going to have to project where your bond might need to be at because you don't want to get into what we call bond stacking, which means you get a bond, it's not good enough, you have to cancel that bond, get a new bond, cancel that bond, get a new bond. And once you cancel a bond, if you have collateral on that bond's going to stay out there for at least 2+ years, which means that collateral that you have is not going to be released for about 2 years. And if you have multiple bonds that you're issuing and canceling, they stack. And I know some companies right now, they have 4 and 5 bonds out there stacked, which means all that collateral is tied up. So you got to be very careful. You don't want to prematurely get a bond and then have to get another bond. This is going to be a challenge. look at the financial impact on your company. All of you should consider PMS, periodic monthly statement. This allows you to pay your duties once a month rather than on a per entry basis, periodic monthly statement once a month. It's great for your cash flow. It works really well. You can join this program. There's no cost to it. Talk to your U.S. Customs broker. All of you should be on PMS, particularly if you're paying duty. All of you. PMS, periodic monthly statement, absolutely a strong recommendation. So finally, let's talk about these final last little comments that we have. The next one, Felisa. So I think this next one, we're going to talk about future outlooks and kind of what we think is going to happen. And basically, Felisa, I think we're looking at just a couple things. Mexico, Canada, they're on a 30-day pause. That we know. Again, they're negotiating, they're talking, they're working things out. I'm optimistic. I have a lot of confidence that I think they're going to work things out. As I said, you look at Mexico, you look at Canada, they cannot afford this. Bottom line, Mexico and Canada cannot afford this. The U.S. represents too big a portion of their overall export volume, 78% for Mexico, 87% for Canada. There is no way they can lose this with the U.S. In my opinion, they will do whatever they have to do. They will spend whatever they have to spend. They will concede whatever they have to concede. And Yanis, you've said it before, I think Mexico is willing to do that.
Mexico is definitely willing to do that from what we're seeing from this new president. Definitely there's that commitment there. So we're hopeful that this pause will continue to extend itself until it resolves.
Now, possible scenarios, remember, this can impact both your import and your export operation. Because remember, we talk about retaliatory tariffs. Also, if you guys have production operations in Mexico, remember that can impact your EMEX operation with higher costs. This is my big one. You got to watch for other countries. He is working his way down the list. Think about what he's doing. He's gone after number 1, Canada. Number 2, Mexico. Number 3, China. And guess what? Number 4 is the EU. The EU represents about 20% of all USA stuff. So I guarantee you he's looking at the EU. That includes going after also the UK. And then he's going to look at Asia and possibly South America. He's going to work his way down the list. And I guarantee you he's going to do exactly the same thing. He wants what he wants. He's going to get what he wants. Also, future negotiation with China, as I said, it's looking good. They are talking. That's a good sign. They did not talk to President Biden. I will tell you this. They did not talk to President Biden. For those 4 years, there were really no ongoing discussions and no negotiation with President Biden. So the good thing is they are talking to President Trump. I think that's a good sign. They want to work with him. I think they know he's serious. Obviously, he's already shot up the duties, and he's looking to maybe do it again. So I think that's something you guys want to watch out for. Again, our final comments here. Again, remember, certainly we're here to help with anything that you need in terms of HTS classification, valuation, origin, free trade agreements, other mitigation strategies. Just reach out if you have any questions. So right now, we don't have a lot of time. I know we've kind of started to go over. Yanis, I know we have a bunch of questions. Is there any final comments you guys want to make? What we'll do, I will promise all of you this, we will send you guys a response. Everybody, every question you've asked, ask a question. Also, as I said, you can reach out. You have a question, we're not going to charge you for that. You came to this webinar, we will send you back a response. Any questions, ask a question, we will send you back a response. As I always say, there are no bad questions, they're all good questions. So take advantage of that. But final comments, Yanis, Felisa?
For your time, for your attention. We know these are tough times, but definitely look into our recommendations. Do those scenario planning. Don't think it's all gone away just because there's a pause. Keep your alert antennas on and thank you and stay tuned. We will be repeating this tomorrow, Steve, in Spanish. So for anyone that wants, we will be sending out the flyer with the link to everyone who attended today as well. If there's any colleagues that would want to listen to this in Spanish, that will also be available.
Lisa?
Same thing. Thank you everyone for joining us. I know we went a little bit over, but at least I hope this was very informative for you guys. Like as Yanis and Steve were saying, make sure you guys are alert of everything going on. Things happen fast, and we believe changes are going to come fast if there's any news out of it. So definitely.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. And again, watch out. We'll certainly be doing future emergency webinars as things come up. This is a great opportunity to share the information. We could share it very, very quickly through this process. So thank you for participating. And hopefully we'll see you on another webinar in the future. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.